Hello, we're going to talk about in this PowerPoint presentation Chapter 9, and this is the section of Chapter 9 that's related to assignment number 2. Make sure that you remember with assignment number 2 that you're going to be raising your child and sometimes re-raising your child by creating the child and raising them to age 5 before you turn in your assignment number 2. So we're going to start out taking a look at temperament in early childhood. And you'll remember in assignment number 1, you talked about the characteristics of temperament. And now we're going to revisit how stable early temperament is. The 3 characteristics that you talked about were positive emotionality, and that is the level of pleasure and activity. And then the opposite of that would be negative emotionality, or the level of fear, frustration, and anger a child experiences. And then the third component is what really shows up in early childhood, and that's effortful control, or the ability to inhibit what's the child's most typical action or reaction. So then in early childhood, the temperament categories change in how they're expressed because of that effortful control component. And there are 3 personality types. The first one, which has the highest percentage, is the previous easy temperament category. And the name has now changed to resilient. And these personality individuals are confident, they're outgoing, and they're emotionally stable. 30% are in the slow to warm category, which is now called over-controlled, where a child is quiet and reserved, or we sometimes call that shy, although that labels a child, so quiet and reserved makes a lot more sense. They're more nervous in new situations, but they tend to be obedient. And then the third category, or personality type, correlates with the difficult category, or temperament, in infancy and toddlerhood, and that's under-controlled, where a child struggles to behave appropriately, or in this slide they call that disobedient. They're more impulsive and more emotional. And so then temperament and attachment, just to kind of summarize, contribute to emotional regulation. And between ages 2 and 5, children learn strategies for dealing with emotions. For example, if they feel overstimulated because of fear or anger, they might close their eyes or cover their ears. By ages 4 to 5, they learn strategies to suppress or hide undesirable emotions. And the outcomes of these changes make them more emotionally competent, and that tends to lead to social competence. So as adults, what we need to do is make sure we take advantage of teachable moments when emotional situations arise, and talk with the children about what emotion they might be feeling and label that emotion, and then talk with them about what would be appropriate behavior in relationship to that emotion. And so then, as adults then, we have to keep in mind about that moral compass and helping children make decisions that are right versus wrong, or good versus bad. And as they're developing that moral compass, they're also developing a conscience, which is, of course, our internal guidance system. And that begins to form at 2.5 and 3. And so some different approaches that parents use and their effectiveness. The first one and most predominant, unfortunately in the United States, is stern parenting and using punishment almost exclusively. And the disadvantage of this is when parents aren't around or authority figures aren't around, children tend to break the rules. What is a more effective approach is to use what traditionally is called discipline, and this is the traditional definition, and that's teaching appropriate behavior. Unfortunately, today, punishment has been added as part of the definition of discipline because we use, in the United States, punishment almost exclusively. But what should happen is parents should be taking a mutually responsive orientation where they're warm with their children and teach them appropriate behavior, but then are firm with them in regards to making sure they follow through with that. So when it comes to the emergence of conscience, there are two types of rules that children begin to understand. Those are the moral rules, which emphasize that we don't want to harm other people, and we want to make sure that we stand up for ourselves but not harm other people in the process, and that we need to assert our own rights while respecting the rights of others. So moral rules might be, and I'm going to word these positively because we want to focus on appropriate behavior, is making sure we use our words instead of hurting people, making sure we ask for a turn when we want to use a toy or borrow something rather than just taking it, and making sure that we follow the rules when it comes to games or other activities rather than doing something that's inappropriate to win. Keeping in mind that in our cognitive chapter we talked about that children in early childhood are egocentric, and so of course they want to be the winners. Social conventional rules are rules of conduct in social contexts, like the rules that are adhered to in your classroom or at your school, the rules you need to follow when you play a game, or then manners and politeness. So let's take a look at this video on social conventional rules. So it looks like we can't look at these videos within the PowerPoint to record it. So I will put these slides in a separate file so that you can look at the videos separately, and we'll move on. So at age 2, children begin to display empathy, which is experiencing the emotions of others. So when another child cries, especially if they're not the cause of the crying, they will look concerned and may even hug or try to make the child feel better. They'll express also sympathy, a feeling of concern for others. And ages 4 to 5, children are able to directly comfort others in distress, although they still probably won't do that if they're the ones that cause the distress. So when we talk about gender differences and aggressiveness, boys tend to be more physically aggressive, whereas girls tend to be more relationally aggressive. And what that means is they tend to talk about whether they like someone, whether someone can sit by them, and use that to manipulate other children instead of physically hitting or hurting. In early childhood, the most common type of aggression tends to be instrumental aggression, which is the goal of instrumental aggression is to get something from someone else that they want, whereas later as they get older, they are more likely to be aggressive in regards to wanting to actually hurt someone, and that's called reactive or hostile aggression. So the types of aggression that we see tend to change as children get older. And again, I'm going to put these videos in a separate file so that you can watch them separate from the recording. But make sure you take a look at these. So we talked a little bit about parenting styles and approaches when it comes to helping children behave in appropriate ways. Now let's look at parenting styles. And Baumrind is the scientist that came up with these ideas. And so authoritative parenting style are parents who are high in both warmth and responsiveness, but they also control children, and so they may ask for children's input. They may allow children to give their opinion, but the parent lets children know that they're the ones that make the final decision. So the child is included in the discussion, but parents make the final decision. The second type is authoritarian, and this is one where parents have high control but low warmth and responsiveness. And so the parent's approach will be children should be seen and not heard, and my opinion is what goes, and you have no say in it. And then there's the uninvolved parent, who is low in warmth and responsiveness and low in control. And so this parent is almost to the point of being neglectful. They just don't want to be involved, and the child can do whatever they want as long as they don't cause a problem for the parent. And the final category is permissive, and these parents are high in warmth and actually tend to want to be their child's friend and responsiveness, but they don't require the child to do anything in regards to behaving appropriately. And so here you have a chart that kind of helps us understand. It has warmth and responsiveness across the top. And there is a high level and a low level. And then on the left-hand side going down, we have the amount of control, a high level of control and a low level of control. And so we can see at the top category, under warmth and responsiveness, the level is high, and under control, the level is high, and these parents are authoritative parents. And then if we go to the right of that row, we can see that the warmth and responsiveness level is low, but the control is very high, and that's authoritarian parents. And then if we go to the bottom row, we have low control and high warmth. That's permissiveness. And then the bottom and final column or cell, we have low warmth and responsiveness and low control. That would be uninvolved. And cooperative, respond to transgressions or inappropriate behavior with reasons why that behavior is inappropriate, reward children for positive behavior or appropriate behavior, especially when it is inconsistent with past negative behaviors. So rather than only focusing on inappropriate and then ignoring appropriate, spend more time focusing on the appropriate. Reduce opportunities for misbehavior. So set up the situation so it's easier for children to behave in appropriate ways. And then use milder punishment techniques rather than spanking or physical punishment. So how do these different types of parenting styles affect children's behavior long term? Well, if we look on the left, we can see that authoritative parenting style has the most positive outcomes for children. And remember, these are parents who are warm and responsive, allow children to voice their opinions, but they're the ones that maintain control. And so children with authoritative parents tend to be more independent, more self-reliant, cheerful, and cooperative. One that has a very negative impact is authoritarian, and sometimes we can get that confused with authoritative because they're very similar, but keep in mind that authoritarian ends with an N, which can help us know that that has negative outcomes, and that will help us distinguish that from the type of parenting that has more positive outcomes, authoritative. So authoritarian parents tend to end up with children who are withdrawn and anxious. They tend to be aggressive away from their parents and destructive as children because they revolt from not having any kind of say or warmth and responsiveness. The other two parenting styles also have negative outcomes. Permissive parenting, the child has low self-control because they're never required to follow any kind of rule at home. They have low cooperativeness because they're allowed to do whatever they want. They're impulsive. They tend to act rashly and don't take time to make decisions and weigh their options, and they tend to be aggressive. And remember, permissive parents are very warm and responsive, but don't exert any type of control. And then uninvolved parents, and these are parents that are neither warm or responsive, nor do they provide any kind of control. Children who have parents that use this style have problems in psychological adjustments, and they have problems in academic achievement because their self-esteem is so low. So let's talk about the difference between punishment and then reinforcement, which is focusing on appropriate behavior. So as we mentioned, in the United States, punishment tends to be the preferred method for most parents, and it's so much preferred that they've changed the definition in Webster's dictionary for discipline and made punishment as one of the definitions of discipline, where traditionally that hasn't been the case. So with punishment, we focus on inappropriate behavior, and we take away something that the child likes, like we take away their favorite TV show or their favorite video game. We add something the child doesn't like giving them extra chores. And this often does not include information regarding what is the appropriate behavior. The focus is only on the inappropriate behavior. And our expert in changing behavior, B.F. Skinner, we talked about in our Chapter 1 PowerPoint, he says that punishment is the least effective way of changing human behavior, and in fact, it only works if it's used rarely. So according to Skinner, The most effective way of changing human behavior is to focus on the appropriate behavior and then reinforce that. And so when we're focusing on appropriate behavior, when a child does something we want them to do, we take away something the child doesn't like, and that's called negative reinforcement. For example, if they don't like picking up their toys, when they do something appropriate, we'll tell them we'll pick up their toys for them because they shared with their sister. And so that's completely opposite of what we do when we're punishing. When we punish, we take away something the child likes, whereas when we're reinforcing, we take away something the child doesn't like. And by the way, negative reinforcement is not punishment. Sometimes people that don't understand reinforcement and operant conditioning might say that, but that's incorrect. The second thing we can do is add something the child likes when they behave appropriately, like letting them watch their favorite show twice because we recorded on the DVR instead of taking away their favorite show. Whereas with punishment, we add something the child doesn't like giving them extra chores. So reinforcement and its focus on appropriate behavior provides information on what's expected in regards to behavior, and it promotes, by the way, positive relationships. Whereas if all that's happening between parent and child is punishment, that ends up causing negative relationships.